All right, so we're back with another episode. We actually have an announcement. This is officially the first week where we had to change our name from. We were previously the Corona Time podcast. Now we are the Critical Fools podcast. So we will be going by this name moving forward. But in this week's episode of the Critical Fools, we will be reviewing Trainspotting. This is our 19th episode. This was a cult classic. 1996 British film. This is the second film that we've reviewed that has had actor Ewan McGregor in it. The other film being Big Fish. I can't remember if he's been in any other films that we've reviewed so far, so he can refresh my memory if I'm
I was
forgetting
gonna
something.
say credit to you for actually saying that because I was not gonna I was gonna skip over those kind of details.
Right. Yeah, I believe this is the second film with Ewan McGregor. But yeah, this was my pick this week. This is my second time viewing this film. I thought my co-host here would enjoy it since he had informed me that he hadn't seen it before. But yeah, I'd love to get your initial thoughts. I thought that this was your type of film that you would probably enjoy.
Yeah, this movie was great. But to elaborate more on that, something that I got to because I saw it on Thursday, and something I reminisced on a little bit was that it's interesting how in the '90s you can almost sense, because I'm thinking of other movies that I've seen in that decade, that you can almost sense that society was kind of at a, I don't want to say crossing point, but they were kind of what's next. There was there was this Cold War, right, for basically multiple decades. It ends in the '90s, and you notice with a lot of films they're kind of aimless. I'm thinking of this movie is a good example, but I was even thinking of the American film Office Space, where it's that whole early monologue with I don't want to say the actor's name. What's his name? Mark or Rent, as they call him.
Mark Ritten.
Yeah, Mark Renton. He gives that whole monologue about oh, I didn't want the 9 to 5, the pet and the wife and the suit. And I think of other films during that period, mid '90s to early 2000s, where there was this kind of I don't want to be
Sort of.
in this. I don't want to be pegged into this basically cookie cutter corporate kind of culture. And
It's just a bit of rebellion, right?
And what's interesting is that we've covered movies that are a little more recent. I would say the last 10 years, and actually maybe because of this podcast, I'm starting to see that there's been a clear change in society. Now there's different anxieties. Back then, it looked like the anxiety was, hey, I don't want to just be a everyday brand. I don't want to be an everyday 9 to 5 cookie cutter corporate slave. And that whole monologue in the beginning was set the tone, and then the rest of the movie, there was highs and lows, but there was moments where I was laughing, crying. It's just overall it's a great film, I gotta say. So
Yeah,
I was gonna ask anything on your second viewing that you picked up that was different. Yeah.
Well, I'll say before that, sort of the epitome of what you were talking about with that anxiety of really not just wanting to be a cog in the corporate system. I think that was epitomized in the film Fight Club, another classic film with Brad Pitt and Edward Norton, where it was sort of this rebellion and sort of wanting to sort of combat a lot of what society's expectations were, right? And as you're sort of iterating sort of that, I can think of a lot of '90s films where that's sort of the case. That, along with the fear of how is technology going to affect society? That was another big theme of films in the '90s.
You're right. That's another big theme, but I give credit to a movie that gets me to even think and reminisce about that, because now when I think of other, like you said, more movies, I was you know what? It's that era. If you were we were kids, but I think people who are basically maybe young adults in the '90s, they probably were feeling this, and they're how do I supposedly the Cold War is over. Supposedly we've reached the pinnacle of our new history, which I think we've learned that that's premature. But interesting enough, that you see a lot of the films, it's kind of there's that character of or characters that are aimless, or trying to get out of the what I call the pigeonhole. And right, Fight Club is a great example. Office Space is the one I mentioned earlier. So I found that really interesting because you see that throughout, in this movie, that Mark is kind of I don't want to just be a corporate slave. And you know what? Doing drugs is freaking fantastic. We learned that it's not always fantastic, but it's an interesting component of the movie. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's anything I necessarily picked up that really stood out in this time. More, I guess one of the more subtleties that I kind of realized was this film was really interesting because although it's a black comedy, you just go through sort of a range of emotions, like you were saying. At some point, like there's a lot of laughter because there's a lot of really funny moments that they put in this film. But then there were at times there was like a lot of shock and kind of horror at
Yeah.
moments as well with the film. So it's really interesting. I can't say there's a lot of films that sort of get out those complete polar opposites of emotions at times. The only sort of clear example that I've seen recently, and it wasn't even a movie but more a TV show. Shout out to Donald Glover because I'm a big fan of his show Atlanta. But one episode in season 2 of Atlanta that really sort of struck this emotions of both laughter and sort of horror was one. It was you've seen that show as well, but I'm thinking of the episode of Teddy Perkins, where at times you're sort of laughing because there's quite a bit of humor, but at the same time it was a very sort of horror show kind of episode.
Oh,
And there were certain
you're talking about the
scenes.
Michael Jackson episode. That's how I remember.
Yeah, yeah, the Michael Jackson
That
episode.
episode still creeps me out. Let's not dwell on it.
It's creepy. It's creepy, but there were elements of laughter. Like you don't know whether to be surprised or horrified, you're not sure of whether you're supposed to laugh or be horrified, or a combination of both. And there were a couple moments where I felt the same in this film.
Yeah. So what did you think of like all the live needle injections that there were in this movie? I was like, at first I was like, okay, like, one scene, 2 scenes. At one point I was like, man, this is like every like 5th scene is like them injecting with the needle, dude.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of what makes this film, I think, great is it's got a lot of sort of experimental elements into it, and they obviously wanted to try to give it as authentic a feel as possible because it does follow a group of drug addicts, right, and how they don't really want to conform to society or society's expectation of them for most of the film. So because of that, I think they wanted to, there were quite a few moments where you see sort of needles and injections, and you just see the dilapidated apartment where that was basically the drug den there, where they keep revisiting, and it's about what you'd expect the drug den to be. I think that they portrayed it in a very sort of honest and brutal way.
Yeah.
More what was interesting is, and you've been to Scotland, although I'm sure you haven't seen quite this side of Edinburgh when you went to visit, but it was sort of interesting getting that European perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Scotland twice, and actually, I highly recommend it. I've been to Edinburgh and Glasgow, and actually, you're right. I remember actually how some of the streets are like when they had you could tell some of the scenes. I was like, oh, that looks like Edinburgh, like 100%. Even more into the Highlands, I was like, oh, that definitely looks like Scotland because it's pretty cold up there too. I mean, I will say that. And I did a little hiking in the little outskirts of Edinburgh. But yeah, it's we'll get into the Scottish thing in a sec. But there's like little scenes in this movie that I was just like, wow, things haven't really changed. Because if you go to the beginning, right, after they do the drugs and all that initial shock and awe, they're at the I think it's early. Like he's at the I'm gonna call it like a bar club, right? And he has a whole monologue about how like you can tell who has relationships and and all the guys.
You can tell who's a player and who's not.
And all the guys standing around. I was just like, I've been to like that's why I'm done with that scene. Like I've seen that like play out like over and over again. And then
that's how it always is.
Obviously he gets lucky, and then you realize that it's a minor.
Yes.
And I was just like, oh man. Actually, it's interesting how like when that's what I was curious about with you. If you picked up on little clues the second time, because I should have realized it looked like a dormitory. At first, I was just like, "Oh, was there any hints?" I rewind, and I was just like, "Oh, you know what? There's like little little clues that this is like either like some kind of boarding school or dormitory or something." Like, so at first I thought like, "Oh, maybe it's just a college like a student," and then it turns out that it was a dorm.
You can see it because of the long extended hallway.
Yeah, and I was just like, and he slept there too. I was just like, oh my goodness. But I was like, those like that's I think that in many ways encapsulates like the movie where like it seems normal, and then there's this gotcha, and you're like, what
Yeah,
the
there's
heck?
this twist,
Then you're like,
and sort of that's why that's like the epitome of a black comedy, right?
yeah, you're like, it's a normal situation turned dark, basically. You're like, dang.
Yeah, like when their other friend, oh my gosh, what was his name? Sick Boy, I believe. When he passes out, and he realizes that he accidentally went number two while he was sleeping, and then that turned into like
Oh yeah,
a very
that was oh my god, yeah.
very gross,
And
very
then the
descriptive
sheets, oh
moment
my goodness,
scene.
yeah.
Yeah. And
The
like you could see sort of the embarrassment and the horror, and you knew something bad was going to happen, and it did.
it did,
Didn't
yeah.
disappoint there.
It was like, oh, that was nasty. Oh, the other scene I was like,
So, some of the I was curious as to, or go ahead. I'll let you go first.
I was gonna say like there was that other scene where like Mark steals the sex. I'm gonna say sex tape because that's what it was, and then like he swaps it out with like that video 100.
The world 100
Yeah,
goals,
yeah.
the top
I
100
think
top
I've
goals.
seen some of those like segments on YouTube, but what's interesting is that like they're watching it like as if it was like a TV show. I was like, I don't know if I could really do that, dude. That's kind of like you were saying, it's got that kind of like nihilistic feel to the film, which is why it's a black comedy. But there's like a lot of
Yeah.
scenes where I was just like, man, that's like I'm
I,
liking
I,
this, but it's dark.
I was curious as to what you thought of Mark Ritten's character. Did you like him? Did you view him positively? Or
So
sort of a mixed bag?
So in the beginning, I thought like it's a mixed bag. Is the short answer, but to give the longer explanation is like in the beginning, I was kind of getting like familiar with this character, and I could understand like kind of like that creative destruction of like I don't want to be like cookie cutter, and even at the end, and we'll get there. I actually didn't think he did anything terrible, but there were moments in throughout the film where I was just like, come on, like especially when like he gets the second chance and he just gets on drugs again. I was just like, my sympathy for you is pretty much like down the toilet. So
More where my sympathy for him really started going down was with what I mean. He really screwed Tommy twice and didn't
that
admit it.
yeah,
That's where I sort of lost any sort of respect for his character.
yeah, he didn't come forward with
One
the video.
he stole Tommy's tape, which ended up leading to him and his girlfriend um, splitting up, his longtime girlfriend. Two, he because of the fallout from his girlfriend, Tommy was very depressed and wanted to try heroin. And basically, he was the one who enabled him to become a heroin addict, which eventually led to his death.
Yeah,
That was a tragic storyline.
yeah. I didn't like the like I said the whole video thing. I was just like, why even bother? But what's interesting is that I think the guy does so many like suspect things that it kind of like, at least for me, I wouldn't say it glossed over, but I kind of expected that. Um, I've seen this archetype before, where like the goody character ends up falling. It's actually probably a very common archetype, so maybe that's why it didn't like it hit me too hard. Maybe I've watched too many movies. But what really hit me with the Tommy guy is that he's the same actor that's in Rome, and actually other films I've seen him as minor characters. So Rome is
Mm-hmm.
also a great TV show for everyone's listening. I definitely recommend it. Um, only 2 seasons. Uh, but it was kind of like like he wasn't taking like he was trying to get clean, he didn't get clean, and then like with Mark, but also like he was still staying involved with the minor. I was like, I know you're maybe they didn't show any more like banging scenes, but like I was just like, why are you so friendly with somebody who looks like she's like 16? Like I don't know. There's a lot of things that Mark does in this movie that I was like, this is so suspect. He should be in jail probably.
All right. By the way, so I got that wrong. It wasn't Sick Boy who had the accident in the sheets. It was Spud. So I just want to point that out. I know probably going to get hammered with the comments.
Sick
So
Boy, how I remember Sick Boy, we'll talk about that scene, is I know he's the father of that baby. That's how I remember him.
Yeah, he was also kind of like, he had the blonde hair too. So that's also how you can know.
Spud was the guy that like, I remember Mark says
he's
like,
the one who ended up going to jail and taking the fall.
And he's the one character that I think Mark does feel for. Like, oh, like he should.
Yeah,
Like,
of course.
I
I
had,
think he feels for Tommy too.
but you know what it is? I almost had this sense. Remember his first monologue where he's introducing Tommy? He almost can, like, maybe the writers did a really good job with this. You could almost feel like a little bit of resentment that, like,
It
oh,
was a little bit of and
like,
disgust in a way because you could tell even when he introduced him for being too honest, and he's like that like scumbag for being too honest.
yeah, like you could tell there's some resentment, like, oh, this guy is like has a girlfriend, a pretty boy, and like I remember that Tommy in the beginning, there's a line where he says like, oh, I wouldn't put that kind of poison in my body, but he ends up doing it, right? Once his life kind of falls apart. And I think one of the reasons Mark doesn't really come forward to save him is because I think Spud, he would. Here's the difference. I think with Spud, even though he went to jail, I think his actions in the end of the film prove that like he would have done something for that guy. But I think with Tommy, there was this maybe deep down like resentment, or this guy's like too good, and like this is a facade. Like nobody's that good. In some of the writing, I could tell that like there was a little hint there, and I think that's why, like, to maybe explain why he doesn't come forward, or he's just kind of like wishy-washy. You want to do it? Oh, I warned you, but whatever, go do it. Like Mark doesn't really like go to bat for Tommy. Even when he dies, he's trying to like, oh, how did he die? Cat poop? What?
So what was it? Toxoplasmosis.
Yeah, that was
man of all ways to go.
Yeah, I was like, wow, that's dang. And then
some brutal writing there.
Yeah. But like in the funeral, like he's asking these kind of like, you can ask this outside or later, but he's like, sometimes you can tell with Mark that he just doesn't care. And I think you see that with a lot of his actions throughout the movie, where like he only really cares when like he could really be in trouble. Like when he had intercourse with a minor, he was concerned about going to jail. I could see it like in his character.
Yeah, it was all, and unfortunately, once you get to that point, I think that level of drug addiction, it's all about self-preservation. It's all about yourself, and you'll do whatever, for the most part, the drug controls you, so you'll do whatever it takes to get the next high. But that leads to other cases where you no longer start thinking about other people. It's all about you and your actions. That's epitomized by him. He's like, he wasn't concerned about the minor girl. It's like, how that can impact me. I can go to jail, right? And then, like, he would probably go through withdrawals, and then it would be bad, and it would affect him poorly, right? And I mean, his whole character is very selfish.
Yeah, that's why I think, towards like when we get past like the middle and the end, I was like, if Mark were to happen to just die in this movie, I would have been like, okay, but that doesn't end up happening to him. But it got to the point where like all the characters, like I was just like, man, like especially I will say the one character that kind of really ticked me was what's his name?
Sick Boy or Big B?
No, Big B. At one point, at first I was like, oh, this is a typical meathead, like you gotta have brawl.
Drunkard.
But at one point I was just like, can somebody actually like kill him? like seriously, like this guy, like he's like attacking random people like pretty violently, and then he just throws the mug to
everything with him is like, I'm gonna solve my problem with a knife.
Yeah, it's like, and then he's a bully, he's bossing everybody around. I was just like, man, can this guy get like, can somebody let it rip, this guy, and like that's it. Where's the police, dude? It was like one of those things where it's like at one point I was just like, can this guy just like, he's like the one character I was like, when he was worried about getting arrested, like he was doing they're doing the drug deals, like can he actually go to jail? Like that was literally my thought when I was watching. I was like, can this guy actually go to jail?
So bringing it back a little earlier, specifically something that Tommy was trying to lead when they went to the scene with the Highlands. I was curious as to like,
I bring it up, dude.
Yeah, I wanted to get your take. What did you think of the monologue?
That was one of the greatest monologues I've ever listened to, because it's so true. It's like, like we're like every else got independence from the British except for us, and we're basically being dominated by these.
I just love his line. He's like, I'm not even mad at the British. Well, what does he say? And I quote, he's like, they're just wankers. And he's like, we don't have the decency to be colonized by a decent nation. He's like, we got colonized by the British of all people. It was just the funniest. And he's like, we're lower than scum, basically. I was like, wow, that was one of the most self-deprecating monologues like I've ever heard.
Yeah, I was
It
just
was
like,
just like Reynolds so funny.
and what's crazy is the cast did a great job because when after that monologue, you could tell everybody just like a pin drop. Everybody's just like, okay, we're done, we're going home.
Yeah, he literally just crushed what Tommy's sort of aspirations there for going on this hike to try to reclaim, try to feel good of himself, and he just brought him back down to earth. It was really sad actually to see that. Because he saw like Tommy in the distance, come on boys, let's go, and then he has that monologue, and he kind of lowers his shoulders and just walks back, and they all leave the Highlands.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, the independence movement is kind of like a very hot button issue over there. So it's kind of like, why is it that like everybody else can do it but we can't? And then like, do we really want to? Are we anything without being being part of the UK? It's almost like it's a very hard conversation to have probably over there. So
right, I can imagine for the Scottish it would be.
But what's interesting is that like he's basically taking like shots at like Scottish people, and that's like
right. Yeah, it was self-deprecating because he is Scottish.
Yeah, that was a good monologue. I was like, I listened to it twice even. I was just like, rewind. That was good. I was gonna ask about so I think the most famous scene, because I did some reading after the
hold on, before you get to that point, the one thing I want, because it's so early on, the other thing that sort of circling back to like when they're at the club, right? One of the things, the dynamics that I found interesting was you're talking to Spud and Tommy, and they were talking about their issues with their girlfriends, and their girlfriends were talking about like separately in the bathroom their issues with them. I just love when like their two girlfriends come back and they're like, "What are you two talking about?" And immediately they both said football. And it sort of cracked me up because I think that's sort of a universal when you're trying to like lie about like, they're going to talk about sports. And whereas in the U.S. it would probably be American football as your sort of cover, right? Now we're talking about sports here. Over there, it's that's where some of the cultural differences are, where you're talking about Scottish football or football in general.
And luckily, I haven't been in too many situations like that because I could see myself.
But it was just pretty funny seeing that dynamic and how they had some pretty good writing there.
Yeah, what was interesting also in that whole sequence was that the girlfriends, one of them was complaining that like, oh, I want him to learn his lesson, so like I'm depriving.
Yeah, she was trying to teach him. Yeah.
The other one's like, why would I do that if like it's the only thing I like about it? I was like, that's rough.
Yeah, the relationship, it was brutal. Yeah, there was a lot of brutal honesty within that sequence. But anyway, so what scene were you talking about that you wanted to discuss?
Probably the most talked about and famous scene of that film, from what I can.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the baby scene, and
God.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember like I was able to find some old 90s reviews, and they were like, was this appropriate for screen? No, I guess that was kind of like the controversy of the.
It was brutal, man.
It was kind of brutal. I mean, I expected something to go wrong because that was the tone they were setting, but I was just like, when they actually showed it, because I thought they were like, here's my guess. When I heard her screaming, I was like, oh, okay. I really thought the baby had died, so I thought like, okay, they're just gonna like somebody's gonna walk into the room and like also scream, and that's gonna confirm it. But when they actually showed it, I was just like, I can see how this was making some headlines.
Some waves. Bro, that was one of the most brutal scenes I think in film history I've ever seen.
So we're gonna show basically a corpse baby on TV. Wow, that's oof. I was like, oof. There's no way you didn't get flack for that.
I mean, it was this whole film was meant to be raw, and they cut no corners trying to be raw with it.
Yeah, they definitely did. Because I will say this, having watched a lot of movies now, like I told you, my expectation was she'll scream, somebody will walk in the room, scream too, and then say like the baby's dead or something. No, to actually like show it and then like have a scene where everybody's just like there. And then like remember, I think it's Sick Boy that's like, you're gonna say anything, Mark? And I was just like, wow, we're gonna stay here for a bit, huh? So it really hits home, and I think that's why like it's probably one of the more talked about scenes.
Yeah, I think the film. I mean, it was brutal, but what was interesting was Mark's response. I think that's why. I mean, clearly one of the main reasons why people go into drugs, because immediately after Mark shoots up, was to sort of escape the pain of their lives in this world. And that's the immediate response, even the response of the mother whose baby had just died from sheer neglect of the drug users, was to, immediately go into taking another shot of heroin to numb the pain.
To shoot up. Yeah, it's
But yeah, that was an absolutely brutal scene, and that's where I was talking about where this film had a lot of moments and it had a lot of brutal rawness / horror within it, and that was a pretty horrifying scene.
Yeah, I agree. Also, there was little so important. Like I guess this movie, for like as much as it has comedy, it's actually important to listen to all the dialogue, because there was dialogue where Mark is saying like, "Oh, nobody knew who the father was," and so basically insinuating that like everybody was sleeping with the mom, which I forgot her character's name. But
everyone was sleeping with mom, and it just left that ambiguity.
Yeah, but then based on the reaction of Sick Boy, he's like, "Oh, we learned who the father was." I was just like, "Wow, that's a brutal lines." Like I gotta say, this movie has like brutal lines. They're like brutal.
It was brutal, man. Yeah, that was just one of the many scenes within it. The other scene that really came to mind with this film, or really stuck out, was when he was going through withdrawals, in his room.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember that. Like that was brutal sequence too.
That was a rough sequence, because he's basically going through.
It was a very surreal / experimental. What was that?
Yeah, I was gonna say he's going through withdrawal the old-fashioned way, cold.
Yeah, but it was interesting the way they were filming it, because it was a very surreal / experimental sequencing to display like what he was hallucinating of when he was going through withdrawals. Like it's the one that was the scene that really creeped me out, was seeing the baby on the ceiling. Like that one, I was just like, "Oh God!"
And the head twist. That was like almost like
the head turn.
That had a little
Exorcist like.
Yeah, I was gonna say Chucky too. Like when the baby head twist, I was like, okay, we're going with this.
So those were the types of like horror moments within the film.
Yeah,
you had that. It was basically he was feeling while he was going through withdrawals. It was showing every moment, every interaction of why he was feeling guilty. Like he even had Spud there sitting on the chest, the clothing chest, where he had the ball and chain, and he was in his garb there, because he knew like he had sort of betrayed his friend in a way by letting him solely take the fall.
Yeah, that chord sequence where he says like, "Oh, I hope like I can recover." I was like, "Oh, this guy's full of crap."
Yeah, but I mean, again, it was just the idea of pure self-preservation within sort of the mindset of addicts.
Yeah.
Right. You'll do. I mean, I'm not going to go into too many details, but yeah, we like. We have like some people who are like addicts in my family, and yeah, they'll do like whatever it takes at times to, for self-preservation.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I guess that helps us. That's a good segue, because I think that in my mind, how I view the film is like before the withdrawal, that sequence of like the surrealism, right? The baby on the wall, the hallucination with his friends, and then like after, when he's like clean and then he actually gets a job, right? It's surprising. He's actually working in the typical, 9-to-5 suit job, but then obviously
it was a very interesting transition.
Yeah, and then like I think this is where I think it's interesting how Diane, she has that scene in the beginning where she's involved with Mark for like one instance, but then she also has that sequence where she's the one writing him, giving him the updates of like the town or the city, how everybody's doing. So like that's her like probably her most prominent sequence. But what's interesting is that like reminds me of like those athletes who come out of like the ghettos and get prominence, and like they have like you can never escape the neighborhood, as they say. Like they come like basically to like mooch off him, because especially what's his name, Bixby is like
because he's the one who's got the money now, so it's like
he's in trouble.
We're homies,
and he's just squatting there. And at one point I was just like, there's a difference between squatting and like you acting like you own the place, like
taking over.
Like, oh, I want beer, I want this, and it's like trashed up.
Pick up the cigarettes, eh?
Yeah, I was like, dang, dude, how are you putting up with this, dude? I think this planted the seeds for later.
Yeah, I love how every time like Bigby does something, they're like, well, what can we do? He's a mate. It's like, okay.
He's a mate. We gotta protect our mates. Yeah, it's
what can you do? He's a mate.
Yeah, it's
I'm like, all right, guys. Like, there's a certain point where you got to draw a line.
yeah, and then Sick Boy. Actually, to rewind before we get to this part, I thought that whole scene where he shoots the dog in the butt, it was hilarious. I was
That was
dying.
twisted.
I was
I
dying.
love
I was
also.
like,
What do they say that he's a vegetarian? Or Sick Boy says he's a vegetarian. He's like, man, for
yeah,
a vegetarian, you got a mean shot.
yeah, it was hilarious. I was like, dang.
Oh man.
Um, but yeah, like I think like that part of the movie, it's intriguing, but I think I could sense that it was like running out a little bit of gas because they get into the whole storyline of the drug deal and then Mark taking the money. I'm interested, like, what did you think
Oh,
of? Oh, go ahead.
hold on. Before that, I also thought that the interesting part is when he's first starting to get clean on methadone,
Mhm.
right? But he. That's what. I mean, it was very realistic because he like all the time, and you can't just say that just for drug dealers, but anyone with an addiction, they always say just one more time. And so
Yeah,
that's what he says. He's like, I just need one more high, right?
yeah,
And every like a multiple times in this movie he says that. And then like when he's on methadone, he's like, that's not enough. I just need one more high to numb the pain, right? Just a little bit before I go on complete withdrawal or like on my recovery process. And so then he goes and he overdoses. He goes to.
oh
I love how
yeah,
they call their drug dealer Mother Superior as well.
yeah,
Like that.
yeah.
That one always cracks me up. And so like he gives them like they're. I love the whole dialogue too of right before he's about to shoot up. He's like, "Oh, welcome to my restaurant," and he's like, "Oh, thank you." And he's like, "Can you please send me a menu?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, very good. Here you go." Now, can I proceed to like serve you up an appetizer, maybe some garlic bread? No, I'll just proceed straight to the main course. And he's like, here you are.
Yeah, yeah, here's the needle. I was like crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
here's the needle.
I forgot that scene where he overdoses. He just puts him in the on the road and like
Yeah, but that was brutal. It was crazy the choice of filmmaking they had. I thought it was very good of him sort of falling into the carpet as if he's in a coffin, right? Because he's borderline on the verge of death at that point. So it was really interesting how they show that sort of tunnel vision with the carpet on both sides because
yeah.
he's fallen into what it really reminded me of. It was starting to fall into the sunken place, like in the reference from the movie Get Out. But yeah,
Mm.
where he's sort of trapped there in that state of limbo, and he can't do anything until he goes to the hospital and they revive him. But yeah, that whole sequence was absolutely brutal when the drug dealer calls the taxi, stuffs in the little that a little bit of money for the cab fare, and then without missing a beat, the cabbie comes out, removes him, and just takes the money off and leaves right in front of the
Yeah,
hospital.
as if this isn't the first radio.
Yeah, you're just like, wow. It was just like a complete lack of sensitization to any sort of overdoses there within that sequence. It was just like that was another very brutal scene because you could tell it's just like, oh, it's just another day on the job.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. I don't really know that. I'm curious as to what Edinburgh's in the mid '90s, what Edinburgh's overdose statistics were at that point because I don't know, but it seems like based on this film and certain subsets that it was probably pretty high or pretty prominent at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know either. I do know that, like, if you look at what happened with the industrial north after the globalization kicked in, especially if you look at like Birmingham and Liverpool and all of these cities up like northern, I'm gonna say England because it's not Scotland. There is like more drug use and criminality because the jobs the good jobs left, and it's probably similar to what we've seen in like Michigan and parts of Wisconsin. So.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, no, even another city that I was watching a documentary on, Wolverhampton, like they're having pretty big drug issues from this drug that is essentially legal, but it's just having like devastating effects there
mm-hmm.
as well. I think that's pretty prominent throughout the UK.
Yeah, it's I'm imagining that, like, I don't know what the data is, but I'm imagining like they're also trying to capture that, like, the society isn't great for everybody at this time. Even though
Mm-hmm.
earlier in our podcast, I discussed how like you can sense in all these movies that there's a lot of disenchantment of like what's next or anxiety of what's next after
Mm-hmm.
this Cold War. Um, But yeah, so okay, transitioning towards that second phase of the movie. Um, what did you think of the whole like? Because I feel like that was almost like a sequence put in to kind of like help end the movie. Because what the thing with these kind of films in general, when I say these kinds, I mean like kind of like comedies, is that like their storylines are not as important as like individual sequences and scenes and some like jokes and
Mm-hmm.
thematic stuff. So my sense was that that whole like drug dealer sequence was kind of used to help wrap up the story. I don't know how if you felt the same way, but I just felt that like it wasn't misplaced because like I could believe that the characters would do that, but
Well,
it's kind of
I can believe it because they were cash strapped, right? And they're
yeah.
the thing with people at that end is
Maybe it was
you're
just how
always
quick.
looking for your.
I was go ahead.
Well, no, I think I didn't get that feeling. I felt like it actually flowed because, every time and Renton, you could always get the idea that he was going to go back to using, right? And so he was even when he like got the job as selling real estate, you had the idea that he like is like, okay, well, this is like sort of normal life. He's going to try it out for a bit, but he's going to revert back. And the opportunity presented himself, and every time that they were always looking for the next score, stealing, trying to figure out how they were going to get their next high. And this just happened to be a golden opportunity for them to make a lot of money so that they could go ahead and spend.
I guess for me, it was just maybe it was a bit quick because I liked the flow.
I think it was quick, but how the sequence happened, I didn't have an issue with it.
Yeah, the actual plot mechanism I think is fine. I think what I was getting at was that like to me personally,
seemed a bit rushed.
The fact that I remember this transition, I think proves to me that like it felt like rushed because like I literally was like, oh, now we're doing this storyline, now we're doing this drug heist or drug deal, and then I will say that one of my other favorite scenes is when they're trying to like negotiate. I'm doing air quotes here because I was like, this is the worst negotiation I ever heard. Like,
well, they also said it was their first time.
Yeah, but also Mark had it best when he's doing the narration. He's like, yeah, so if this guy wants to pay us nothing, what are we going to do? Walk away with these pounds of
he had no leverage.
Yeah, it was like this is like terrible, and that's why like they were happy to get like anything decent. So the guy could have offered them like nothing, and then they would have been like, yeah, we'll take it because what are they going to do? Walk out with pounds of cocaine?
They're not going to do anything.
Yeah, but how they celebrated too, I was just like, wow.
It was pretty funny. But before we get to that, I was kind of curious as to what you thought about when Ritten sort of had sort of the second phase where he got clean and like clean for the longest period of time with the film. What did you think? Do you think why do you think the writers chose to make him be have his profession be in real estate?
That's a good question. I didn't think much of it. I thought like they just needed. Because in my opinion, sometimes a director or screenplay has to just have like there's a kind of they want to just move the story along. So I think they needed to find something realistic, right? So in all honesty, like we've discussed many times offline, we know there's a lot of professions that doesn't really require a college degree, but it's just used as it's used as a filter,
Yeah, but he could have been a cook. He could have been. There's a number of things where why real estate?
I mean, if I had to give an interpretation, I would think it's because like
because I have my own reasoning.
I'm interested to hear yours, but I will say that if I had to give like a shoot from the hip answer, I think it's because like he worked in the field of like I don't know, actually not worked in the field, but he dwelled in a lot of that drug culture, and a lot of that is salesmanship and kind of like BSing to a degree. And if we're honest, some real estate agents will do that too to clients to get them to sign on the dotted line. But I'm curious about what your I feel like your interpretations can be they make my light bulb go up.
So mine was because when in his previous life when he was using heavily, he was always looking for that next sort of quick hit, that sort of dopamine rush. And when you're in real estate, I imagine I'm not in there, but I could see how every time you make a sale. You get that little bit of hit or a rush, right? Because you made a sale. I'm sure he's based on commission, so he's getting a good amount of cash. That's probably the closest satisfaction that he can get outside of drugs to give him that little bit of rush that you can get while still being clean. And I think that was sort of their reasoning for. And believability for someone who's sort of
Mm.
transitioning out of that to still be in real estate and get that little bit of hit.
I like that interpretation. I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. Then I would feel like almost a better profession would have been to be a bookie or something, because you'll definitely get that
Yeah,
high being a gambler.
but being a bookie requires cash to start off with.
Oh,
And he doesn't have that.
He doesn't have much.
Right.
That's
I mean,
true.
what did he say? What after he worked for an extended period of time, he had 2,000 pounds. Like, that's good enough, but that's not enough to be a bookie starting off.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess.
So I thought that was believable, because I was like, oh, okay, I could see, yeah. Because I imagine every time you make a sale, it's kind of like, you know, you get a little bit of winnings by cranking the lever on a slot machine, right? It's a little bit of dopamine rush every time. And it's not the same extent that, you know, a hit of heroin would give you, but it's the closest thing in, you know, your sort of sober everyday life that could achieve that bit.
Now I'm thinking like they could have even done a more interesting storyline where he took out loans to start like betting in football matches, and then it ends up all going wrong. That would have been a great. That would have been better than the actual ending that we got. And then,
yeah, but then it wouldn't have tied in the other characters, and then it just would have been focused on him. They had to find a way to tie in both Big B and Sick Boy and Spud.
Could you actually, it would have changed the ending? Could you imagine if like he got into the like taking these dangerous loans, it didn't work out until he actually is working with Big B because he needs the drug deal? That would have been mental,
okay.
Dude.
now you're gonna have a Trainspotting remake, Chris, that you're gonna be directing.
Yeah, so like, here's my new screenplay. Make it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Anyway, so going back to the final scene that we both agreed was a little bit rushed. Yeah, it was pretty funny to see them celebrate. Yeah, and then I love how it was pretty interesting, because I remember when I first saw this, I remember Mark proposed to Spud, you know, while the other two are out. Come on, let's take the money, right?
Yeah,
and he can't tell if he's joking, and neither can spell, or if he's being serious, right? I remember the first time I was like, I don't know, I like, based on the vibe, you can tell he really wants to take the money, but it's too risky, especially with Big B being there. And the other point where I was just like, man, I just wanted to punch Big B was when he commanded Mark essentially to like bring him the cigarettes.
Yeah. Because
but
that was his way of like expressing dominance. Like
no, it was dominance. It was that Big B always at every point he had to be the alpha. And what was interesting, and I thought from sort of a a shooting choice, was when he comes down and he gives him the cigarettes, because it was very sort of, it's been a second since because I watched it several days ago, but I remember there being sort of some sort of hue saturation or interesting shot choice between him sort of lighting the cigarette of Big B and you seeing sort of the smoke. I thought it was an interesting choice that the director decided to go with there in terms of shooting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Because seemed to be like some tone saturation or like some color saturation there.
What's interesting about that scene too is that Mark lights it. Like first he thinks he can just give him the cigarettes, but he can tell by doing the eye look that like, oh, he wants me to light it and give it. It's like, wow, right. It's like the whole shebang.
It's kind of like when two dogs stare at each other and you're waiting to see who's gonna like look away first. It's kind of like that. It was just pure command and dominance. But as we know in the end, Ritten ends up getting the last laugh.
Yeah, I was.
The other thing I found brutal. Hold on. The other thing that I found brutal was that Spud tries to stop him because this dude is just too. This dude is in Big B is just too reactionary. Man, he's got the shortest fuse of any like character you've ever seen. Right?
Oh, yeah.
He automatically brings the knife out. And then he cut Spud's arm, and then he's like, dude, I need to go to the hospital. It's going to get infected. You're not going to the hospital. Suck it up.
Yeah,
and like, this guy is just like brutal. He cares solely about himself.
Yeah, it's that's why I know there's a sequel to this movie, which is on my watch list, but like I'm curious to see how these characters
T2?
Yeah, how these characters evolve over time. But yeah, like you're right, the shortest fuse, like I kind of saw it coming where he was just gonna like hurt, like because he would hurt anybody. Like he doesn't like there's no bound. Yeah, and That's why like I wasn't like terrible. I didn't feel terrible for him when he like lost the money and then the cops showed up. I was like, oh, they're gonna lock him up finally. But I mean, I didn't feel too like I didn't want Mark to like win in the end. That was the sense I got. And I felt like the ending was like, oh, it looks like he's going to like get out of it. I didn't fully like feel like he truly deserved that outcome. But I'll see what I mean. We'll see what happens in that sequel. But that, at least that
Yeah,
was my
I
interpretation of the
don't
ending.
I don't have high hopes for the sequel, but yeah, I mean, you could tell the only character that Mark had admiration for was Spud, because in the end he ends up leaving that 2,000 pounds in a locker, however much it was, right? Because he didn't want to rob him; he just wanted to rob the other two. Because he said even that he's like, if Sick Boy was in my shoes, he would have done the same thing. And then he has no love for Big B, obviously, because he's just a complete jerk throughout the film. But yeah, it was quite an interesting ending, and I just found it interesting how when films do that, how it just made full circle back to sort of the beginning. It was a beginning monologue is how they ended it.
Yeah, it's one of those good like
I,
I don't want to say cookie cutter, but it's one of those how do I describe it? It's one of those archetypical like ways of like ending a film and wrapping it like in a
full
bow.
circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought that it was sort of appropriate the way they ended it for that to be. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, no, I've got all this money. He's like, I don't want the traditional. He's like, I just want to, and he acts like he's going to change, but deep down, it's just going to be cyclical. More likely than not, he's just going to waste it all on drugs again, and he's going to end up in the same cycle. I think that was the whole point, was to show that within even drugs, it's just a cycle, right? Because there are so many times where he was on, he got clean, and then went back, and then he's going to try again, on, clean, get back. And in a way, that was the most appropriate ending, because that is the cycle of many drug addicts.
Yeah. It's like I know what you're talking about. Like it's that cycle of, oh, I'm good, and then like they relapse because like
then you relapse. Then you're good, then you relapse.
People forget that it's the like it is the drug itself that gives them the high, but that's what they're chasing, is that high. Because
That's the high. Yeah, it's always for the high.
I don't want to get too deep into the names, but like I know individuals that like they think they're normal, but like you can see that they're still searching to get that hit again. That dopamine.
Yeah, you always want that high. That's what's very dangerous, because certain personalities are just prone to addiction. And at that point, if you just have that sort of predisposed nature, then like it's very hard to break that.
Yeah, I agree.
Because then you're fighting genetics at that point as well.
Yeah, it's tough to break. It's the power of habit.
Hold on. By the way, the other scene that I just found hilarious, and it's really interesting because it shows how far we've come as a society too. Was basically when Bigby was so when Bigby was squatting, I just found the sequence of him. He's like, put all this on whatever horse, and then he goes, and then he wins. And they're like, yeah, we're going out, and of course, like he gets some money, and what do? People who are in this sort of scene, they go ahead and they're going to party it up and blow their money, basically. That's what ends up happening. And so they go clubbing. And yeah, what was interesting because of the 90s is that Bigby ends up making out with somebody from the club that he met. Turns out this person was transgendered, and his reaction was to freak out. But it was just interesting because I don't think that scene, or like if that movie was made today, that scene definitely wouldn't have made the cut, because there was quite a bit of transphobia there.
Yeah, it would have been controversial. What's interesting is that Mark almost has a very not poetic, what's the term, like foresight quote. He says in that sequence, like, the future is going to be... He
didn't realize the change.
The setup is Diane tells him that, like, music is changing, the world is changing, and they're in this club, and he's like, yeah, music is changing. He's like, and he makes a line, he has a line that...
and then he says, unfortunately, Bigby didn't see these changes coming.
Yeah,
and then,
like,
something to that extent.
Right before then he says, like, yeah, but right before he says that line, he says, the future won't have like genders, men or women, and it will be like
in a way it was very prophetic.
Yeah, that line, I was just like, you know what, he was onto something, because I think definitely how we look at gender studies today is definitely, it's non-traditional.
And what's becoming more normative is basically what he was predicting. So that was very interesting. It was yeah, almost a very prophetic scene.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought it up because like it's one of those scenes where like I think you're right. It wouldn't be like accepted today to make, but like that line, that though I think it's like 3 sentences. I was just like, oh, it was good. Like you're right, the setup with linking back to Diane, and then the future will be what like post gender, and then like that last line with like Big B didn't get it. I was like, yeah, he didn't get it.
Nope.
And yeah, and then that sequence too. It was kind of like it was funny, but also a bit like shivery because like he's like making out, and then like he trying to like
Comes to the realization that what he thought was happening or like his paradigm was shattered at that moment.
Yeah, because like he's doing the typical Mr. Suave move, and then he's like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Oh!" And then he just like runs out.
I got from a surprise. Yeah.
It was honestly, even though the society's progressed, I would say at least personally, I think that would still kind of like throw me off. So I can't really like say like, oh, like I would be like, oh, let's continue forward. I don't think I would have ran out of the car, but I would have been like, oh, this is.
You might have had a different reaction, but if you're not expecting it, it would catch you by surprise for sure.
I do know somebody that would like definitely run out and like probably keep running. So.
Well, I mean, it's brutal, and I think that knowing. So this is where I think sort of it was just something that they could go further with in the storyline, but knowing Ritten or Big B's character in this, and unfortunately there was a big case that happened very recently with violence against transgendered peoples, specifically the soldier in the Philippines who, sadly, a situation was happening very similar to what was portrayed in this movie back in, I think, 2014. Soldier ended up killing someone who was transgendered in the Philippines and just recently got off. I wouldn't be surprised in the truest nature of Big B if something similar would have happened. They just couldn't obviously show that sort of sequence within it because he's every indication that he's either very violent and he's a very violent and impulsive person. Where I wouldn't have been surprised that, given that shock and horror, he would have used his knife in that situation.
Yeah, but I think whoever like director, screenwriters, I think they knew a little bit better, knowing that if even in '96, if they did that, this movie probably would not have been. It would have been banned.
It would have had backlash, but in reality, sadly so. That probably would have been a reaction of Big B's character. I mean, given definitely. every other sequence. Sadly, and I'm not advocating for that in the slightest. I'm just saying, truly based on the nature of that character.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, and yeah, I did enjoy the sort of prophetic, because I rewatched it. I was like, that line actually really did smash me. Sort of what stuck out for you the second time around. It's probably that line, given like what's been going on in society for the last several years.
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that like it would have fit Big B's character, but I'm starting to think now, knowing like some of the.
No, there's no way they could have put that on film. I agree with you.
But I think also like even in real life, I think it would have turned that way too, because I think I've read like studies about like violence against transgender people, and that's some of the ways it happens is like, somebody has this, like you said, earth-shattering, moment, and he can't accept, and it's like, well, if they just go away, I can deny it, it is nasty like that. So,
there was a big case of that, like I said, in the Philippines with a U.S. soldier who went out, brought someone back to their hotel room and found out this person was transgendered and ended up killing them.
Yeah.
So it's brutal, and unfortunately, there are cases like that where it happens. But anyway, I think we've talked about that enough. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up regarding this film, or should we get the final ratings?
Not really. I think we've covered a lot. I guess to give my little last tidbits before ratings, is that this film is surprisingly like it has it all, right? It's one of those like comedies where it's like it's funny, it's dark, like I said, it's a black comedy. Yeah. But like there's other black comedies that you just live like going like, oh man, that was like really, really dark. But here, like even the ending, it felt like, even though there was really low points and some really high funny points, it kind of like ends like appropriately, like in this middle of like, okay, like he's moving on, but like, he didn't come out unscathed, there's a lot of like comedies where like all this stuff happens and then suddenly like, oh, but nothing really changed from the beginning, and you're like, what? You know, it's a good movie, but you know that doesn't show me any real character progression. So I think even like in this genre with comedies and stuff, I think that's what separates like probably the better films from like the average ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my kind of like last 2 cents. So I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the ending was appropriate because, you know, this film goes through the idea that, you know, drug addicts always go through the cycle of, it's like, you know, you're at your low point, you're going to try to get clean, things are going all right for a bit, and then something happens where that high always draws you back, and then you repeat, and then it's a cycle. And in many ways, I think this film was trying to parallel the cycle of a drug addict, because it even ends in a cycle of like where it starts, it sort of ends.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was very appropriate in the way that they chose to end the film. I thought that was good. I was very impressed by Retten's character playing, or by McEwen. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Obi-Wan Kenobi is how I remember.
McEwen. No. I'm sorry. I was really impressed by actor McGregor's character here, and sort of his portrayal of Mark Renton. You know, going through, like, I'm always curious when actors play drug addicts. You know, what they have to sort of, how they mentally prepare for a role like this. I thought Ewan McGregor did a great job, and it just shows his versatility. Because you compare this character compared to his character in Big Fish. It was just two completely different roles, and he both, I thought, nailed them very well.
Yeah. I forgot the other point I'd like to bring up is that the music in this movie is underrated. It's really good. So like there was good, like, you know, segues, and it's like, you know, you're playing like basically 90s kind of like I want to say like disco type of music, and it was almost like perfectly placed. I was like,
yeah, it was very nostalgic.
This movie is good. Yeah, I was like, I looked up some of these songs, and I was like, oh, Iggy Pop, you know.
There's a lot of sort of 80s pop. So it was a very 80s feel too in a lot of the music choice. And then I just love every time they go to the club, of course, you have to have like your Euro EDM, your Euro trance going on there, which the 90s were very big into that too.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's go on, and I think we've hit pretty much every point with this. You want to go on with your final ratings?
Yeah. So I want to be more definitive now. Like, I know you like to give ranges, but to me this was 8.5 out of 10. Like, it's one of the better films we've covered so far. It's definitely I recommend it. It's one of those movies that, you know, you'll be crying, laughing, and then like, you know, maybe
shock horror a bit too.
Yeah, a little bit in between as well. And like, you know, I always find it a good sign of a film when I'm watching it, and like I have a busy schedule like you do, and I usually try to watch actually films in 2 parts. That I actually wanted to finish it, so I was like, I'll stay up a little bit later and I'll finish the movie. So especially like it's not too long, you know, it's like right in that sweet spot.
Yeah, runtime's an hour 33.
Yeah, so it's in that good sweet spot. So you know, we'll definitely, we did Stalker, but we'll definitely be eventually hitting other movies that are probably like, I'll even tell you, like, you should probably do 2 sittings. But it's one of those, 8.5 out of 10, solid watch. You know, it's got my stamp of approval. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I think we've been hitting a lot of our marks more closely lately. I would give this an 8.5 out of 10 as well. I thought the rewatchability is pretty high. Second time I've seen this. I like. So we haven't done a lot of comedies or films that have a lot of sort of comedic relief in it, and this film definitely hits that many times throughout the movie. I like sort of some of the more experimental shots that the director tried to give, especially when he's sort of rehabbing, gives you a little bit of that horror there, but it shows you sort of what the character's going through as well during that process where he's trying to get clean, or he's not trying to get clean. His parents were actually forcing him to get clean at that point. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of check marks in terms of good filmmaking in my mind that this movie hits. So I thought 8.5 out of 10 was fair for this film.
Yeah, we tend to be in the same range always. I'm waiting for one movie where like I say 6 or 5 and you say 8.
I think that has happened a couple times.
I have to. I've been. Okay, maybe it has. You're right. I have to go back
And
and see the
there's one or two times. It's interesting because there's one or two times where I've gone lower than you, even though you tend to be the harsher critic, and you're like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I chalk it up to like, you just don't have the refined taste yet, but yeah,
To each their own, man.
yeah. But yeah, I think that wraps it up. I think we're good.
Yeah. So anyway, so just I think that just about wraps it up. Unless there's any last point you want to make.
Nah, I think we covered everything.
Yeah. All right. Well, that concludes our review on Trainspotting, of the 1996 film. If you liked our commentary on the film, please like and subscribe to our channel, the Critical Fools Podcast. Sorry, we just came up with that name change. And I'll give you a little side note to our audience. The reason we came up with the name change is that we actually, when we tried uploading some of our videos under Corona time, we actually got tagged with some of the CDC coronavirus guidelines and health info. So we decided, to not be associated as sort of a health podcast, to end up switching our name. So that's sort of a little bit of a tidbit as to how we came up with the Critical Fools podcast. And we thought that the naming was pretty fitting because we're pretty critical in a lot of our film reviews, but we do have some nuances, and we act like fools at times during our reviews and our opinions as well. So we thought it was a fitting title. Anyway, if you liked our commentary, like I said before, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned until next week.